this series we're going to be using a drawing grid. This will help me to show you how to get the shapes into proportion and positioned well inside your picture area. You will need to draw out a grid like this, 12 centimetres by 12 centimetres, and then draw 2 horizontal lines this way and 2 vertical lines this way. Each of these areas here should be 4 centimetres by 4 centimetres each. Of course, you could draw your grid a lot larger if you want your drawing to be larger, but I think it's quite fun to work on a small scale, especially when you're starting out. It's a good idea to use cheap copy paper to do this stage, so that you feel less worried about doing it perfectly and you can just enjoy the sketching. Once you've drawn your grid, you can then either draw it each time that you're going to do a new piece of artwork, or you can photocopy it several times so you've got lots of grids ready for each drawing that we do. We are aiming to make a very simple drawing of pebbles of different sizes and shapes with different patterns on. In order to do this, we need to work out the basic shapes first on our drawing grid. Here you can see how I've simplified those shapes into circles and ovals. So now let's take a new drawing grid so that I can show you how to draw these basic shapes. Make sure that your pencil is nice and sharp. A soft pencil is best for sketching. So the first pebble that we want to draw is our main one in the scene. It's going to be on top of the pile, so let's start with that one. Let's just draw very loose oval shape inside our boxes. You can see that I'm not trying to be perfect with my drawing. I'm using lots of sketchy lines to get to where I want to be. Remember that pebbles aren't perfectly round, all kinds of odd shapes. The next one I want to draw is just above this one. So I'm going to draw the full shape of it, even though I know that that pebble sits under that pebble. And what we'll do is we'll rub out some of these lines later on, the ones that we don't need. Then I'm going to draw another one down here. Make sure that you aim at filling up the space with the pebbles. Don't draw them too small. Think about how large my ones are. Some of them are quite egg-shaped as well, aren't they? Notice how they overlap each other. This one's going to sit in this bottom corner here. Don't worry if you make lines that are that you might class as mistakes. We can rub those out later. And then I'm going to put a small one in here and a tiny pebble there. Slightly larger one there. So what we're looking for here is a variety of sizes and shapes and also directions. So down in this space here I want one of those nice long thin pebbles, so it's going to be slightly different to the others there. And then up here, another one to fill this area to the top left. Make that one quite nice and big. Oh, my pencil's a little bit thin on the end there, not to worry. So when you're happy with those shapes, we can get rid of some of the lines that we don't actually need. I'm going to use the soft, what's called a soft putty rubber, but any rubber will do for this. Putty rubbers are quite nice with drawing because they don't damage the surface of the paper. So we know that this pebble here is the one that's on the top of the pile. So any of these other marks that are within that area, we can just rub out the way, remove. You might still see some faint lines from your pencil drawing, but that's fine. And then this pebble here is just under this one, but it's on top of that one. So I'm going to remove that line there, so they look a bit more like they're sitting on top of each other. And then this pebble here is on top of that one, so I'm going to remove this line here. Okay, so just to make sure you can see what we've got left, let's go over in a more positive way, so using a bit more pressure with your pencil, but still sketching round. See, lots of little marks are often better than just one mark. See how we've intensified the outline of that pebble there, and then we can pick up these lines here. So we're just really telling ourselves which lines that we want to keep. Forgetting that one there. And these small ones were just sitting on their own anyway, weren't they? So that's given us a really nice bold drawing to work with. Now that we've finished our initial sketch and worked out our shapes, we need to get this drawing onto some art paper so that we can do a more finished piece of work and actually paint it as well. So I'm using watercolour paper here, and I've cut my paper so that it's the same size as my drawing grid. So now, in order to get my drawing onto my art paper, I'm going to use the help of a little thing called a light box. These are easily available online to buy, and just plug them in and they light up like this. You can pop your sketch drawing on the surface, and then when you put your paper on top of that, you'll be able to see your initial drawing coming through on your paper, and that way you can trace through the shapes that you've already drawn and worked out. So another way of doing it is to use some tracing paper to trace your original drawing and transfer that down onto your art paper, or you could try just putting your drawing on a window, so the light from the window will shine through your initial drawing and you should be able to see the drawing coming through onto your art paper. So there's 3 different methods there of transferring it. So I've turned down my studio lights just so that you can see this a bit more clearly. It's gone a bit dark. So you can see as I press the paper against that surface, I can see those shapes. So I'm going to just draw through lightly. when you're drawing, try to make your lines have a purpose. So don't just kind of come there and just leave that one hanging loose without it attaching to something else. So try and make the lines join the other shapes that are there. See where that join is there and that join is there. Just going to adjust that a little bit because I don't want to be too close to the edge of my paper. So there you can see it's transferred nicely. So I can actually take all this other stuff away now and just work on the picture by itself. And now I've got the studio lights back on, and we're going to add some simple patterns to our pebbles to make them fun to paint. So when you're thinking about the pebbles, try and remember that they are three-dimensional shapes. So imagine holding a pebble in your hand and how that would feel. So when we draw the patterns on the pebbles, we need to think about that. So I'm going to make some curved line shapes on my pebbles, and that will help to give it the look of a rounded shape. Notice how these stripes here get smaller as they get to the edge of the pebble shape. That's giving it a nice rounded look. In the same way, you can do some lines here. So you can make your lines and patterns however you would like to. I've realised that in my initial drawing I wanted that pebble to be over that pebble, but then when I've drawn that through it's ended up being the other way around, but it doesn't matter. It still works, so that's fine. So have some fun drawing some simple stripes. And if you ever look at pebbles on the beach, you'll see they do have lots of different markings on them. This one will just give some small dots, kind of speckled surface on that one. This one I'm going to keep plain, and this one can have a stripe as well. So again, nice curvy shape will help to give your pebble the look of the curve on the surface of it. I might just pop another one in there. So now we can have a little bit of fun with the painting side of things. We've got our drawing ready there on the art paper. For this I'm using watercolour inks. Now you could paint your scene in any kinds of watercolours that you might have. You can even do it with colouring pencils if you want to. So I'm going to show you, I'm using these fluid inks, which are quite good because they're already mixed up and they're nice when you're doing little quick illustrations. So I've had a little bit of a mess about with colours to start with, which is always a good idea. So you can see here I've got some pieces of leftover watercolour paper from other things, and it's always worth keeping those so you can just try out your colours. And it's really fun to just try 2 or 3 colours and letting them run into each other like that to see what happens. Testing some out, some work and some don't, but it's good to do that before you do it onto your drawing. Here you can see I've used a nice combination of greys and pinks, because you don't really want to be working that out on your drawing as you go, so it's a good idea to choose your colours first. So I've chosen 5 to use here. So I've got a yellow ochre, which is that really soft yellow there. Any yellow will do. I've got a very bluish grey colour there. I've got a pink. I've also got a sort of quite a natural brown as well. So that's useful to use. And I've got some white to use as well a bit later on for some highlights. I've got a mixing palette there and somewhere to put the colours in individually. Got some paper towel, selection of brushes, and you're more than likely going to need to use a hairdryer. I'm going to paint this first pebble here. I think I'm going to use some pink and some grey for that. So just make sure that you've got enough paint made for the area that you're going to fill. Don't use your paints too dry with watercolours. And I'm just going to paint some water into that first area, my first pebble. Just to make the surface damp. Let that sink in for a second. Take some pink. You can see how the paint just floats about in the surface of the water, making really nice patterns by itself. And I can grab a bit of the bluey grey that I've got. And because you've already established before that these two colours work well together, it kind of doesn't matter what they do on the surface, so it can be quite random how you apply the colour. You know it's going to look nice anyhow. This is something nice about pebbles, that they have this sort of mix of colours on them. And then if you want to, you can just try dropping a tiny bit of water into that mix. Create some more texture shapes on the surface. While that one's drying, you can take some of the grey and one of these small ones. And then rinse your brush out, grab a little bit of pink, just drop that in as well. The colour's a bit strong, you can just put a bit more water with it. Just play around until it gives you a nice effect. I'm just going to dry that now with a hairdryer. Let's get to work on one of the other pebbles now. You'll notice that the colours dry lighter than when you first put them down when they're wet, so things do change a little bit. Use some of this yellow ochre. And I also want to use some of these natural colours. I've already got some grey there, but I'm just going to add to that a bit more. So I've got those colours ready. So again, I'm just going to wet the area. You don't want to go too wet with that because it will make your paint colours too pale. Just really want it a bit damp on that surface. So let's take this yellow ochre and fill the whole area with this colour first. See the paint floating around in the surface of the puddle, which is nice. And then whilst it's still wet, let's add a little bit of the warmer brown. You might have different colours to this, you might choose to be using different colours. It's entirely up to you. The method will be the same. A little bit of it. Just rinsing my brush out in between. It's tempting to go back in and fiddle with the colours, but it's probably better with watercolour if you just let it float about by itself. And just a bit of the darker grey around the edge here. And drop some water in there. Gives a nice kind of speckled look. And then get that bit dry. Let's make this the next one. Just work that again. Some clear water. I'm going to use the yellow again here. And then just going to add a little bit of pink into that. Dry. And now let's paint this little one down here, separate from the others. I think this one I'm just going to have straight grey on there, grey blue. It's nice and clean. Do one of these over here. This one I want it to have a bit of a stronger colour, so I'm not wetting the area first. I'm just going to use this light warm brown colour in here straight onto the paper. Just use the tip of my brush to get into that fiddly corner. And then just right to that edge there. Try and use the absolute tip of the brush if you can for those detail, very small corners in there. Back to the yellow again. Again, I want this to be quite a strong flat colour, so I'm going straight onto the dry surface. Got a couple of little tiny ones to do. And I'm going to get all that dry so that we can put some of the detailed pattern back in. So hopefully you should be able to still see the patterns that you drew on your pebbles. If you've painted them quite thickly and you've lost those lines, you can just draw them back in for yourself so you can see them again. I'm going to use a white paint this time. It is still a watercolour ink, but you'll notice that it's quite a bit thicker in consistency than the ones that we've used before. It's more opaque, so if you're using regular watercolour, you should have a white in your set somewhere, which will do the job, or you could use a white acrylic, will also work. So what we're looking to do is just to follow those lines that we drew. Earlier, just adding the white. You might find you need to have a couple of goes for each stripe that you do. So maybe do one, let it dry, and then come back to it again. Make some of the lines a little bit thicker than others. So if you push down a bit harder with your brush, it will make a thicker line. And if your lines are a bit wobbly, don't worry about that, because that's how they'd be in nature anyway. Pebbles on the top, so I'm going to give a little bit of a wider pattern on there. If you find that your white paint is picking up any of the colour from underneath, it's because the painting's not dry underneath. So if that bothers you, I would suggest you just let it dry off a bit longer before you do this technique. It's nice to have thin and thick lines next to each other. So I'm going to have some dots on it. I'm just going to do small ones there, and maybe one there. Once your paints are actually dry, it's a good idea just to check your drawing and look out for any gaps anywhere or sort of scruffy edges that you don't like. So if you look really closely at the drawing there, you can see I've got a few gaps here and there. So I'm just going to get my pencil and go back over some of my lines just lightly. I don't want it too heavy, to just finish off that drawing. Just going to add a few little pebbles in between, tiny stones that can just be part of the drawing. Hope you enjoyed creating your little pebble drawings, paintings. Remember, you can do this scene in any colours you want, and if it doesn't work out well for you the first time, you've still got your drawing grid template that you created earlier, so you can do another one.